Tom Miller stood at attention in the gleaming hallway of the Galactic Defense Force headquarters, trying not to fidget as 3 alien officers circled him. Their tall, slender forms towered over his stocky 5 feet 10 inches frame, and their 4-fingered hands kept making dismissive gestures. "This is the new recruit from Earth?" The lead officer, Commander Blue, asked with a snort that made his nose ridges flutter. "He's so compact." The other 2 officers, Captain Green and Lieutenant Red, didn't bother hiding their amusement. Tom kept his face neutral, though his jaw clenched slightly. He'd faced similar reactions throughout his life, people underestimating him because he didn't look impressive at first glance. But growing up on his family's farm had built strength that didn't show in fancy muscles. "The human barely reaches my shoulder," Captain Green noted, her silver eyes narrowing. "How can such a small species handle our advanced weaponry? Perhaps he could manage the light rifles?" Lieutenant Red suggested with poorly concealed mockery. The standard heavy weapons would surely overwhelm him. Commander Blue's head tentacles rippled with agreement. "Yes, we'll start him with basic training. No point rushing him into equipment he can't handle." He turned to Tom with what was probably meant to be a kind smile, showing rows of small, pointed teeth. "Don't worry, human. We'll find something suitable for your capabilities." Tom remained silent, remembering his grandfather's advice, "Let them underestimate you, it makes proving them wrong so much sweeter." He'd been the first human accepted into the Galactic Defense Force after Earth joined the Alliance, and he intended to show exactly what humans could do. The officers led him to the training arena, a vast chamber filled with various weapons and training equipment. Other alien recruits were already there, all of them at least a foot taller than Tom. They paused their exercises to stare at him, some whispering and pointing. "We'll start with a basic assessment," Commander Blue announced, still wearing that condescending smile. "Just to see what you can manage." Tom nodded politely, but his eyes were drawn to something in the corner, an enormous weapon that looked like a cross between a cannon and a rail gun. It was easily twice his size, and none of the other recruits were going anywhere near it. "Oh, that?" Lieutenant Red noticed his interest and laughed. "That's the Mark 7 heavy plasma cannon. Even our strongest warriors need mechanical assistance to lift it. Don't worry yourself about that one." Tom's lips curved into a slight smile. On the farm, he'd regularly moved equipment and loads that would surprise these aliens. He'd spent years helping his father repair tractors, lift engine blocks, and handle stubborn livestock. But for now, he'd play along. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "Whatever you think is best." The officers exchanged amused glances, clearly thinking. They had a properly submissive recruit who knew his limitations. They had no idea what was coming. "Well then," Commander Blue said, reaching for a small training rifle, "let's start with something more your speed." Tom straightened his shoulders and prepared to begin his assessment. Soon enough, they'd learn that humanity's greatest strength was being perpetually underestimated. The training rifle felt like a toy in Tom's hands. He'd expected alien technology to be more impressive, but this weapon seemed designed for beings who'd never done a hard day's work in their lives. "Now, careful with the recoil," Captain Green warned, her silver eyes glinting with amusement. "These training rifles can be quite powerful for beginners." Tom took aim at the holographic target, remembering the kick of his grandfather's old hunting rifle. That ancient weapon had more recoil than this sleek piece of alien tech. He squeezed the trigger, and the rifle hummed softly. Dead center. Perfect shot. The aliens blinked in surprise. "Beginner's luck," Lieutenant Red muttered, his head tentacles twitching nervously. "Try it again, human." Tom fired 5 more shots in rapid succession. Each one hit the bullseye, forming a tight cluster that would make any marksman proud. The watching recruits fell silent, their earlier whispers dying away. Commander Blue cleared his throat. "Well, acceptable. But hitting stationary targets is one thing. Real combat requires strength and endurance. They moved to the physical assessment area, where various alien exercise machines stood ready. A group of tall, muscular recruits were already there, lifting weights that made their arms tremble. These are calibrated for standard galactic gravity, Captain Green explained. We'll start you at the lowest setting. May I try the regular setting? Tom interrupted politely. He'd been watching the other recruits and had done some quick mental calculations. The gravity on their training station was actually lighter than Earth's. The three officers exchanged glances. If you insist, Commander Blue said with a sigh. But don't be discouraged when. Tom stepped up to the machine and lifted the weight smoothly, completing a perfect set of repetitions. The weight that had made the alien recruit strain felt comfortable to him, like lifting hay bales during harvest season. Impossible, Lieutenant Red whispered, his skin changing color in shock. The gravity calibration must be wrong. But Tom was already moving to the next machine, and the next, completing each exercise with the same steady competence. Years of farm work had built the kind of practical strength these aliens hadn't expected. A small crowd began to gather. Other instructors wandered over, drawn by the unusual sight. Tom could hear them muttering about human anomalies and genetic modifications, unable to believe that his abilities were natural. Enough. Commander Blue finally called out, his voice slightly higher than usual. This proves nothing. Real combat situations require more than just raw strength. You need tactical thinking, quick reactions, and... His voice trailed off as Tom casually picked up a fallen piece of training equipment that two alien recruits had been struggling to lift together. He set it back in place with careful precision, then turned to face the commander. Sir, Tom said respectfully, I understand there's more to being a soldier than physical strength. I'm here to learn everything you can teach me. The commander's face twitched. Yes, well, tomorrow we'll begin actual combat training. That will be quite different. As the officers hurried away to discuss this unexpected development, Tom noticed some of the other recruits looking at him differently now. The mockery was gone, replaced by curiosity and, in some cases, respect. But Tom's eyes kept drifting to that massive plasma cannon in the corner. He'd been doing more calculations in his head, comparing its size to farm equipment he'd handled. Soon, very soon, he'd show them what a human could really do. For now, though, he simply continued his exercises, hiding a small smile as he heard the officers arguing in the corridor about reviewing human biological data and updating training protocols. Day 1 wasn't over yet, and he had plenty more surprises in store. The next morning, Tom arrived at the training arena to find it transformed. Holographic barriers created a complex maze, and combat drones hovered silently in the air. The other recruits were already gearing up in protective suits that looked like liquid metal. Today we test your combat reflexes, Commander Blue announced, looking smug again. Earth's gravity may have given you unusual strength, but let's see how you handle our advanced combat scenarios. Tom accepted the protective suit from Captain Green, noting how the other officers watched expectantly. They were hoping he'd struggle with the alien technology, he realized. The suit felt strange as it molded itself to his body, but he remembered his mother's advice about new experiences: different isn't difficult, it's just different. The challenge is simple, Lieutenant Red explained, his tentacles rippling with barely contained glee. Navigate the maze while avoiding drone fire. The suits will register hits. 3 hits, and you're eliminated. Tom nodded, observing how the other recruits moved through their warm-up exercises. Their movements were graceful but predictable, like dancers following choreography. He thought about dodging angry bulls and racing to shelter during sudden storms. Sometimes, survival didn't look pretty. Begin. Commander Blue ordered. The first recruit entered the maze, moving with fluid grace. He made it halfway through before the drones tagged him out. The second lasted a bit longer but still fell to the floating attackers. Then it was Tom's turn. He took a deep breath and stepped into the maze. Immediately, 3 drones dove toward him, their training beams cutting through the air. But Tom was already moving, ducking and rolling in ways that seemed to surprise everyone, including the drones. Growing up on the farm, he'd learned that the shortest distance between 2 points wasn't always a straight line. Sometimes you had to roll under a fence or squeeze through a narrow gap. His movements weren't elegant, but they were effective. Impossible. Lieutenant Red sputtered as Tom evaded another drone attack. The human's pattern recognition shouldn't be this advanced. But Tom wasn't recognizing patterns, he was anticipating them, using the same instincts that had helped him predict where a startled horse would bolt or how a loaded trailer might shift its weight. He reached the maze's center without taking a single hit. "Interesting technique," Commander Blue said stiffly. "Though hardly standard procedure." "Sometimes standard procedure gets you killed," Tom replied quietly, remembering close calls with farm machinery. "The enemy won't care if you dodge pretty." A few of the younger recruits nodded thoughtfully. One of them, a tall alien named Swift, approached Tom during the break. "Your movements are strange," Swift said, "but effective. Would you teach me?" Before Tom could answer, alarms blared throughout the station. Red lights flashed, and the station's AI announced, "Alert. Training area power fluctuation detected. Heavy weapons system malfunction imminent." The massive plasma cannon in the corner began to spark dangerously. Its support system was failing, and it was starting to tilt toward a group of junior recruits who stood frozen in fear. "The safety protocols are offline," Captain Green shouted. "We can't activate the mechanical lift." "Everyone out," Commander Blue ordered. "We'll have to let it fall and repair the damage later." But Tom was already moving. Those recruits wouldn't clear the area in time, and if that weapon hit the ground wrong, it could do much worse than just break. He'd seen enough equipment accidents to know, sometimes you had to act fast and worry about the proper procedures later. "Human. Stand back," Lieutenant Red called out. "You can't possibly." Tom reached the plasma cannon just as its support gave way completely. In that moment, he forgot about proving anything to anyone. This was just like that time the tractor had started to roll toward his little sister, and he'd had to choose between impossible and unthinkable. He planted his feet, reached up, and prepared to show the Galactic Defense Force exactly what impossible meant to a human. Time seemed to slow down as the massive plasma cannon began its fall. Tom's muscles tensed as the weight crashed into his waiting arms. The impact drove him down to one knee, and for a split second, even he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Then muscle memory took over. The same kind that had helped him catch falling engine blocks and stabilized tipping machinery. His legs straightened slowly, muscles burning with familiar effort. In his mind, he wasn't lifting an alien weapon, he was just saving his sister from the tractor all over again. The assembled aliens stood frozen in shock. Even the station's emergency sirens seemed to fade into background noise as Tom steadied the massive weapon. That's over 2,000 kilos of weight." Captain Green's voice cracked with disbelief. "The servolifts barely manage it." But Tom wasn't done. With a grunt of effort, he shifted his grip and began walking forward, carrying the plasma cannon away from the frightened recruits. Each step was careful and measured, just like moving heavy equipment across the farmyard. "The human spine should be crushed," Lieutenant Red whispered, his skin cycling through various colors of shock. "His bones should be powdered." Commander Blue's head tentacles had gone completely still, a sign of total astonishment in his species. "How? What kind of genetic engineering?" "No engineering," Tom managed to say through gritted teeth as he moved the cannon to a secure position. "Just good old Earth gravity, and farm work. Swift, the young recruit who'd asked for training earlier, rushed forward to help stabilize the weapon as Tom carefully set it down. Other recruits followed, working together to secure it properly. You saved their lives, Swift said, gesturing to the junior recruits who had been in the weapon's path. Without mechanical assistance. Without powered armor. Just, you. Tom straightened up, rolling his shoulders to work out the strain. He could feel the familiar ache setting in. Tomorrow would be rough, but nothing he hadn't handled before after a hard day's work. On Earth, he explained, catching his breath, we don't always have machines to help. Sometimes you have to be the machine. Commander Blue approached slowly, his previous condescension replaced by something that looked like respect and worry. When Earth joined the Alliance, he said quietly, many questioned whether humans were ready for advanced galactic technology. We thought you were too primitive, too basic. He gestured at the massive weapon. But perhaps we were asking the wrong questions. Sir? Tom asked, noticing how the other officers were now looking at him with a mixture of fear and awe. We wondered if humans could handle our technology, Commander Blue continued. We should have wondered if our technology could handle humans. He turned to address the gathered recruits. Training is suspended for today. I need to make some calls. As the commander hurried away, Tom heard him muttering about reviewing all human recruitment protocols and potential military implications. Captain Green and Lieutenant Red followed, both stealing glances back at Tom as if seeing him for the first time. The other recruits gathered around him, their earlier mockery forgotten. Swift stepped forward again, speaking for the group. Would you still be willing to teach us? He asked. Not just about moving differently in combat, but about this kind of strength? Tom looked at their eager faces and remembered all the times he'd helped train new farmhands. It's not about being the strongest, he said. It's about knowing how to use what strength you have. He glanced at the plasma cannon, now safely secured. Though I have to admit, that was a bit heavier than the tractor back home. A few recruits laughed nervously, but Tom could see the wheels turning in their heads. They were starting to understand that humanity's primitive nature might be exactly what the Galactic Defense Force needed. Word spread through the Galactic Defense Force station like wildfire. By evening, the training arena was packed with spectators from every department, all trying to catch a glimpse of the human who lifted the impossible. Tom sat in the mess hall, aware of the stares but focusing on his meal. His muscles ached pleasantly, reminding him of harvest seasons back home. He'd messaged his family about the day's events, and could almost hear his grandfather's laughter. Is this seat taken? A gravelly voice asked. Tom looked up to see Master Sergeant Rock, the station's legendary combat instructor. The veteran warrior's crystalline skin sparkled under the lights as he settled his massive frame into the chair. I've been training soldiers for 40 years, Rock said, fixing Tom with all three of his eyes. Never seen anything quite like today's show. Wasn't trying to put on a show, sir, Tom replied, straight-faced. Just didn't want anyone getting hurt. Rock's crystal facets shifted in what Tom had learned was a smile. That's exactly what interests me. Most recruits would have frozen. Or worse, tried to be a hero for the wrong reasons. He leaned forward. You just acted. Like it was natural. Back home, hesitating gets people killed, Tom explained, thinking of all the close calls on the farm. Equipment doesn't care about your reputation. Their conversation was interrupted by Commander Blue's return. The officer looked frazzled, his head tentacles drooping with exhaustion. Miller, he addressed Tom formally, I've spent 6 hours in emergency meetings with high command. Your actions today have complicated things. Tom straightened in his chair. Sir, if I overstepped. Overstepped? Commander Blue's laugh had a slightly hysterical edge. You've completely shattered our understanding of human capabilities. High Command is in an uproar. Half of them are excited about the military applications, the other half are terrified about security implications. Master Sergeant Rock's crystalline form vibrated with amusement. Sounds like they're overthinking it. Sometimes strength is just strength. Tell that to the weapons department. Commander Blue sighed. They're demanding immediate revisions to all human-rated equipment. Apparently, we've been under-engineering everything. Tom remembered the flimsy training rifle and tried not to smile. And that's not all, the commander continued. Starting tomorrow, you're being reassigned. Master Sergeant Rock will oversee your advanced combat training personally. He glanced at the combat instructor. Assuming you're still willing? Rock's crystal facets glinted. Oh, I wouldn't miss this for anything. Been getting bored teaching the same old techniques. A group of recruits approached their table, led by Swift. They carried themselves differently now, less artificial grace, more practical awareness of their movements. Sir, Swift addressed Tom with genuine respect. We've been practicing what you showed us about real-world movement. Would you watch us demonstrate? Commander Blue's head tentacles perked up with interest. What's this? The human way of moving, sir, Swift explained. Less about looking perfect, more about staying alive. He demonstrated a rough but effective dodge that looked nothing like standard training moves. Unorthodox, Commander Blue muttered, but Master Sergeant Rock was nodding appreciatively. Sometimes unorthodox keeps you breathing, the combat instructor said. Maybe we all have something to learn here. Tom watched as his fellow recruits demonstrated their new techniques, offering quiet suggestions for improvement. He noticed how they'd already begun adapting the movements to their different body types and strengths. You know, Commander Blue said thoughtfully, when Earth joined the Alliance, we thought we'd be teaching humans everything. Never occurred to us that you might learn something from us. Tom finished politely. The commander's head tentacles waved in acknowledgement. Perhaps being primitive isn't always a disadvantage. Master Sergeant Rock's crystalline laugh rang out. Primitive? No, Commander. I'd say we're just seeing what happens when theory meets practice. And practice seems to be winning. The training arena had transformed over the next few days. Gone were the perfectly arranged equipment rows and programmed exercise routines. Instead, Master Sergeant Rock and Tom had created what the aliens called organized chaos. Again. Rock's crystalline voice boomed across the space. And this time, remember what Miller taught you, forget how it looks, focus on what works. Tom watched as 30 recruits of various species maneuvered through the new obstacle course. They crawled under unstable barriers, lifted real weights instead of using anti-gravity assists, and worked together to move heavy equipment. Swift led the group, having embraced the human approach with surprising enthusiasm. Your training methods are unusual, said a new voice. Tom turned to see Admiral Starr, a high-ranking official who had arrived that morning to observe the changes. But I can't argue with the results. Indeed, the recruits were showing remarkable improvement. Even Captain Green and Lieutenant Red had joined some sessions, though they still seemed shocked every time Tom demonstrated a new technique. Simple isn't the same as easy, Tom explained, remembering his father's words. Back home, we learned by doing, not by memorizing perfect forms. The Admiral watched as Swift helped another recruit adjust their lifting technique. We've always prided ourselves on our advanced technology, she mused. Perhaps that pride made us forget some fundamental truths about physical combat. Master Sergeant Rock approached, his crystalline form gleaming with excitement. Admiral, watch this, he said, gesturing to the far end of the arena. Miller, show them the new combat drill. Tom nodded and stepped into the practice area. The lights dimmed, and combat drones buzzed to life, twice as many as in the standard training program. But instead of facing them with standard defense patterns, Tom moved like water finding its path, using the environment and the drone's own momentum against them. "Incredible," Admiral Starr whispered. "No wasted movement, no formal stances, just pure efficiency." "We've been teaching soldiers to fight like machines," Rock said. "Miller showed us how to fight like living beings." The Admiral's attention shifted to where several recruits were practicing with the training rifles. Instead of standing still in perfect shooting poses, they were moving, adapting, making use of cover. "High Command will want a full report," she said finally. "And there's talk of expanding the human recruitment program." Tom finished his demonstration and walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Ma'am, if I may suggest something?" "Go ahead, Miller." "Don't just recruit from Earth's military," he said. "Look at our farmers, construction workers, mechanics. People who work with their hands, who know how to solve problems when technology fails." Admiral Starr's expression showed interest. "Because they understand the physical world in ways our technology-focused society has forgotten?" "Yes, ma'am. And because they know that sometimes the simple solution is the right solution." As if to prove his point, alarms suddenly blared through the station. "Warning, gravity generators malfunctioning in Sector 7. Emergency protocols initiated." The Admiral reached for her communicator, but Tom was already moving. He remembered similar situations during power outages on the farm. When electric systems failed, you needed manual solutions fast. "Swift," he called out. "Bring your team. Remember those lifting techniques we practiced?" The alien recruits rushed to follow him, their movements confident despite the crisis. They'd learned that strength wasn't just about muscles, it was about knowing how to use what you had. Admiral Starr watched them go, then turned to Master Sergeant Rock. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when we first encountered humans, we thought they were centuries behind us technologically." Rock's crystalline form sparkled with amusement. "And now? Now I'm wondering if they've been ahead of us all along, at least in some ways. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the best solutions." Through the viewing window, they could see Tom and his team manually securing equipment that the gravity failure had affected, working together with an efficiency that no amount of theoretical training could teach. 3 months after the plasma cannon incident, Tom stood at attention once again in the gleaming hallway of the Galactic Defense Force headquarters. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood 20 new human recruits, farmers, construction workers, mechanics, and others who worked with their hands back on Earth. Commander Blue, now the head of the new human integration program, addressed the group. His head tentacles moved with enthusiasm rather than condescension. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Force," he announced. "You're part of a new initiative, inspired by the achievements of Sergeant Miller here." Tom tried not to smile at his new rank. The promotion had come after the gravity generator incident, where his team's quick thinking and practical approach had prevented millions in equipment damage. "Some of you might have heard stories about Sergeant Miller lifting our heaviest weapon," Captain Green added, her silver eyes now showing respect rather than amusement. "But that's not why you're here. You're here because Earth has taught us something valuable about strength, practicality, and thinking on your feet." Lieutenant Red, who now specialized in adapting training programs for different species, stepped forward. "Your first assignment won't be combat training," he announced. "Instead, you'll be paired with alien recruits to share your practical experience." Tom watched as his original training group, led by Swift, entered the hall. They moved differently now, a blend of their natural alien grace and human practicality. Swift had become one of the station's top performers, combining both styles into something entirely new. 3 months ago, Master Sergeant Rock rumbled, his crystalline form glowing, "We thought we were helping humans catch up to galactic standards. Instead, we learned that sometimes the old ways are the best ways." The new human recruits exchanged glances, looking both proud and nervous. Tom remembered standing in their place, feeling like he had to prove himself. Now he understood that it had never been about proving anything, it had been about sharing something valuable. "The galaxy is changing," Admiral Starr said, making a surprise appearance. "We face challenges that technology alone can't solve. We need people who understand the physical world, who can think creatively, who know that sometimes the simplest solution is the right solution." She gestured to where the infamous plasma cannon now stood in a place of honor, modified with human-friendly controls. "This weapon once represented everything we thought humans couldn't handle. Now it represents everything we needed to learn." Tom stepped forward to address the new recruits. "They're going to tell you stories about how I lifted that cannon," he said. "But the real story isn't about strength. It's about knowing that every challenge has a solution if you're willing to try the unexpected." He looked at his alien colleagues, no longer skeptical officers but trusted friends. "We're not here to replace their technology or ignore their advances. We're here to add something they'd forgotten, the value of practical experience and good old-fashioned hard work." Swift joined him, demonstrating their new hybrid fighting style that had become standard training. "Together, we're stronger," the alien said. Human practicality, alien technology, both have their place. As the new recruits began their orientation, Tom caught Commander Blue smiling at the plasma cannon. "You know," the commander said quietly, "that day when you lifted this, I thought I was watching the impossible. Now I realize I was watching the future." Tom thought about his family's farm, about all the lessons he'd learned there. "Sometimes the future looks a lot like the past, sir," he replied. "Just with better tools." Around them, humans and aliens worked together, sharing stories and techniques. The hallway that had once echoed with mockery now rang with laughter and excited conversation. The Galactic Defense Force had changed, and Tom had helped change it. Not with impressive technology or advanced theories, but with simple, practical knowledge passed down through generations of humans who knew that sometimes the strongest weapon wasn't the heaviest gun, it was knowing how to use whatever you had at hand. In the end, they hadn't just accepted human recruits. They'd accepted human wisdom.